In Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman takes us on a fascinating journey through the workings of the human mind. This book brings together decades of research in psychology and behavioral economics to help us understand the processes behind our thoughts and decisions. At its core, the book explores two distinct modes of thinking that shape how we perceive the world and make choices. These two modes, which Kahneman calls System 1 and System 2, operate in fundamentally different ways, influencing everything from our daily routines to major life decisions. System 1 is the fast, intuitive side of the brain. It's automatic, quick, and effortless. This is the part of our thinking that allows us to recognize faces, make snap judgments, and respond to immediate situations. On the other hand, System 2 is slow, deliberate, and analytical. It requires effort and concentration and is what we rely on when solving complex problems or making well-thought-out decisions. Kahneman's aim with the book is to show us just how much our fast, intuitive thinking, System 1, dominates our lives and how often it leads us astray. While System 1 can be helpful in many situations, it also tends to rely on shortcuts and biases that can distort our judgment. System 2, although more rational, is slower and more energy-consuming, and we tend to avoid using it unless absolutely necessary. In this summary, we'll explore the key ideas presented in Thinking Fast and Slow, and how Kahneman's insights into human thought can help us recognize and correct our cognitive biases, ultimately improving how we make decisions in everyday life. Before we dive into the details, I recommend subscribing to the channel for more book summaries like this one. If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like and share it with someone who would love it too. If there's another book you'd like me to summarize, feel free to mention it in the comments. Now let's continue. Kahneman introduces two systems of thinking, System 1 and System 2, as the foundational concept of thinking fast and slow. These systems describe the dual nature of how our minds process information and solve problems, with each playing a unique and complementary role. System 1 is the fast system, responsible for quick automatic decisions. It operates unconsciously and is shaped by patterns of experience. Examples of System 1 thinking include recognizing a familiar face in a crowd, detecting anger in someone's voice, or calculating 2 plus 2 instantly without conscious effort. This system is adept at managing routine tasks and relies on intuition. Its speed allows us to respond rapidly to our environment, often without requiring much mental effort. For instance, if you see a car speeding toward you, System 1 immediately kicks in to move you out of harm's way without you needing to think through the process logically. However, System 1 can be overly reliant on mental shortcuts or heuristics, which, while helpful for saving time and effort, can introduce errors in judgment. It tends to jump to conclusions based on limited information and is prone to biases, which we'll explore in later sections. System 2, on the other hand, is the slow system responsible for more deliberate, conscious decision-making. This system is engaged when we're solving complex problems, making careful decisions, or focusing on tasks that require sustained mental effort. For example, if you're calculating 17 times 24, evaluating a business strategy, or reading through a legal contract, you're using System 2. It requires significant cognitive resources, and as a result, people often try to avoid engaging it unless necessary. The two systems interact constantly in daily life. While System 1 often runs the show, making decisions quickly and efficiently, System 2 steps in when more complex reasoning or analytical thinking is needed. However, because System 2 is slower and more effortful, we can become cognitively lazy, defaulting to the faster but less accurate System 1, which opens the door to cognitive biases and faulty reasoning. One key insight from Kahneman's work is that System 2 is not always in control, even when we think it is. System 1's intuitive responses often influence System 2 without our awareness. For example, a person might make a snap judgment, System 1, about someone based on appearance or first impressions and then justify that judgment with a more logical explanation, System 2. This dynamic interplay between the two systems is critical to understanding why people make seemingly irrational choices. A significant portion of Thinking Fast and Slow focuses on the role of heuristics and biases in shaping our decisions. Heuristics are mental shortcuts that allow us to make quick judgments without having to analyze every piece of information. While heuristics can be useful for navigating everyday life, they often lead to errors in judgment and decision-making. Kahneman, along with his collaborator Amos Tversky, identified several key heuristics that contribute to cognitive biases. These biases distort our perception of reality and affect everything from how we assess risk to how we interpret information. One common heuristic is the availability heuristic, where people judge the likelihood of an event based on how easily they can recall examples of that event. For example, after hearing about a plane crash on the news, people may overestimate the likelihood of air travel accidents, even though statistically, air travel remains one of the safest forms of transportation. The vividness and recency of the news story make the event more available in our minds, skewing our perception of its frequency. Another heuristic is the representativeness heuristic, which leads us to judge the probability of an event by how closely it matches our existing stereotypes or expectations. For example, if someone is described as quiet and introverted, people might assume they are more likely to be a librarian than a salesperson, even if the probability of someone being a salesperson is far higher, simply due to the number of salespeople in the world. This heuristic causes us to ignore base rates and other relevant statistical information in favor of superficial similarities. Biases, such as confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out and favor information that supports our pre-existing beliefs, and anchoring bias, where we rely too heavily on the first piece of information encountered, are also explored in depth. These biases, rooted in the heuristics we use, often lead to suboptimal decisions in various domains, from personal finance to public policy. Kahneman's research into heuristics and biases has profoundly influenced the field of behavioral economics, providing insights into why people don't always act in their best interests, despite the assumptions of traditional economic theory. One of the key biases Kahneman explores in Thinking Fast and Slow is overconfidence. Overconfidence is the tendency to have excessive faith in our own abilities, knowledge, and judgments. It can manifest in a variety of ways, from overestimating our driving skills to being overly optimistic about a project's chances of success. Kahneman argues that overconfidence is widespread, especially in professional fields like finance, medicine, and politics, where individuals are often rewarded for projecting certainty and decisiveness. In reality, however, people frequently misjudge the complexity of the situations they face and are unaware of the limits of their knowledge. This overconfidence can lead to disastrous consequences, such as poor investment decisions, failed business ventures, or policy blunders. One of the reasons overconfidence is so pervasive is that we tend to overestimate how much we know about a given topic. In the book, Kahneman refers to the illusion of validity, where people believe that the conclusions they've reached are more accurate than they truly are, even in the face of contradictory evidence. Another aspect of overconfidence is the planning fallacy, which refers to the tendency to underestimate the time, costs, and risks involved in future actions. For instance, people often assume they can complete a task or project far more quickly than is realistic, leading to cost overruns, missed deadlines, and frustration. This occurs because individuals focus too much on the ideal scenario and fail to account for potential setbacks or delays. The danger of overconfidence is that it blinds us to the complexity and uncertainty of the world. It leads us to discount relevant information, ignore warning signs, and take greater risks than we should. Kahneman suggests that one way to combat overconfidence is to adopt a more humble and probabilistic approach to decision-making, acknowledging the limits of our knowledge and being open to alternative perspectives. A major breakthrough in Kahneman's work was the development of prospect theory, which he co-authored with Amos Tversky. Prospect theory challenges the traditional economic assumption that individuals are rational agents who make decisions to maximize their utility. Instead, it shows that people's choices are heavily influenced by how options are framed and their relative perception of gains and losses. One of the core ideas of prospect theory is loss aversion, which refers to the fact that people experience losses more intensely than gains. In other words, losing $100 feels much worse than gaining $100 feels good. This asymmetry in how we experience gains and losses leads to risk-averse behavior when dealing with potential gains and risk-seeking behavior when trying to avoid losses. For example, when presented with a choice between a sure gain of $900 or a 90% chance of winning $1,000, most people will take the sure $900, even though the expected value of both options is the same. This reflects the preference for certainty when it comes to gains. However, when faced with a choice between a sure loss of $900 or a 90% chance of losing $1,000, many people will take the riskier option, hoping to avoid the loss altogether. This shows how loss aversion drives risk-seeking behavior when the alternative is a definite loss. Prospect theory also introduces the concept of framing effects, demonstrating how the way a decision is framed can influence our choices. For example, people tend to be more willing to take risks when a decision is framed in terms of avoiding losses rather than securing gains. Kahneman illustrates this with the famous Asian disease problem, where participants were more likely to choose a riskier option when the outcomes were framed as saving lives rather than losing them. Prospect theory has had a profound impact on economics, psychology, and public policy. It has been used to explain a wide range of behaviors, from why people hold on to losing investments to why they buy insurance for low-probability events. It also laid the groundwork for the field of behavioral economics, which integrates insights from psychology into economic theory. The anchoring effect is another important cognitive bias that Kahneman explores in Thinking Fast and Slow. Anchoring occurs when people rely too heavily on the first piece of information they encounter, the anchor, when making decisions. Even when the anchor is arbitrary or irrelevant, it can strongly influence subsequent judgments. One famous experiment discussed by Kahneman involves asking participants to spin a random wheel that produced numbers between 0 and 100. After spinning the wheel, participants were asked to estimate the percentage of African countries in the United Nations. Even though the number on the wheel had no relevance to the question, those who spun higher numbers gave higher estimates, while those who spun lower numbers gave lower estimates. This demonstrates how powerful anchors can be, even when they are completely unrelated to the decision at hand. In real-world settings, anchoring can affect a wide range of decisions, from how much we are willing to pay for a product to how we perceive the severity of a situation. For example, in negotiations, the first offer often sets the anchor for the entire discussion, with subsequent offers gravitating around that initial figure. Similarly, in marketing, retailers often use high original prices as anchors to make discounts seem more appealing, even if the original price is inflated. The anchoring effect can be difficult to overcome because it operates at a subconscious level. Even when people are aware of the anchor's influence, they often struggle to adjust their judgments appropriately. Kahneman suggests that one way to mitigate the impact of anchoring is to deliberately consider alternative perspectives and question the relevance of the initial information. The availability heuristic is a cognitive shortcut that influences how we judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. In Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman explains that this heuristic often leads to overestimations of the frequency or probability of certain events, especially when they are more vivid, emotional, or recent in memory. For example, after hearing about a plane crash on the news, people tend to overestimate the risk of flying, even though statistically, air travel remains extremely safe. The emotional impact of the news story makes it more available in our minds, leading us to mistakenly believe that such events are more common than they are. Similarly, if someone personally knows a victim of a crime, they may overestimate the likelihood of becoming a victim themselves, even if crime rates in their area are low. The ease with which they can recall the example makes the risk seem more prominent than it truly is. The availability heuristic also plays a role in shaping public opinion and policy decisions. Media coverage of certain events, such as terrorist attacks or natural disasters, can lead to heightened public concern and political responses, even if the actual risk of such events is relatively low compared to other, less sensationalized risks like heart disease or car accidents. While the availability heuristic can be helpful for making quick judgments, it can also lead to systematic errors in perception and decision-making. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of recognizing when this heuristic is at play and seeking out more objective data to inform decisions. The representativeness heuristic is another cognitive shortcut that Kahneman explores in Thinking Fast and Slow. This heuristic leads people to judge the probability of an event based on how closely it resembles their existing stereotypes or expectations, often at the expense of considering more relevant statistical information. For example, if someone is described as quiet and analytical, people might assume they're more likely to be a librarian than a salesperson, even though the probability of someone being a salesperson is much higher due to the sheer number of salespeople in the workforce. This heuristic causes us to overlook base rates, the actual frequency of different categories in the population, in favor of superficial similarities. One famous example of the representativeness heuristic is the conjunction fallacy. In one experiment, participants were given a description of a woman named Linda, who was portrayed as passionate about social justice and concerned with issues like gender equality. When asked whether it was more likely that Linda was a bank teller or a bank teller who is also active in the feminist movement, most participants chose the second option, even though it is statistically less likely. This is because the description of Linda fits their stereotype of a feminist, leading them to ignore the fact that it is always more probable for someone to belong to a single category, bank teller, than to a conjunction of two categories, bank teller and feminist. The representativeness heuristic also explains why people fall for the gambler's fallacy, the mistaken belief that future probabilities are influenced by past events in situations that are statistically independent. For example, if a coin has landed on heads 5 times in a row, many people mistakenly believe that tails is due on the next flip, even though the probability of heads or tails remains 50-50 on each flip. This heuristic is a powerful reminder that our intuitive judgments are often based on superficial similarities rather than logical analysis. Kahneman argues that by becoming aware of the representativeness heuristic, we can improve our decision-making by paying more attention to base rates and statistical reasoning. Framing effects refer to the way in which the presentation or framing of information can significantly influence our decisions and judgments. In Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman demonstrates how the same decision can lead to different choices depending on whether the outcomes are framed as gains or losses. A well-known example of framing effects comes from Kahneman's Asian disease problem experiment. Participants were asked to choose between 2 programs to combat a deadly disease. In one version, the options were framed in terms of lives saved. Program A would save 200 lives for sure, while Program B had a 1/3 chance of saving 600 lives and a 2/3 chance of saving no one. Most participants chose the sure option, Program A. However, when the same problem was framed in terms of lives lost, Program A would result in 400 people dying for sure, while Program B had a 1/3 chance that no one would die and a 2/3 chance that 600 would die. The majority switched to the riskier option, Program B. Even though the 2 scenarios are mathematically identical, the framing in terms of losses made people more willing to take risks. This example highlights the power of framing in shaping our decisions. When outcomes are framed as gains, people tend to be more risk-averse, preferring sure gains over potential losses. When outcomes are framed as losses, however, people are more likely to take risks to avoid the negative outcome. Framing effects can be seen in a wide range of real-world situations, from political messaging to marketing campaigns. For example, a politician might frame a new policy in terms of job creation to make it more appealing, while an advertiser might highlight a discount as a way to save money rather than framing it as a reduced price. Kahneman emphasizes that framing is a subtle but powerful influence on decision-making. and being aware of how information is framed can help us make more rational choices. Loss aversion is a key concept in Kahneman's prospect theory. It refers to the idea that people feel the pain of losses more intensely than the pleasure of gains. In Thinking Fast and Slow, Kahneman explores how this asymmetry in how we experience gains and losses influences our behavior. It often leads to risk-averse decisions when dealing with potential gains, and risk-seeking behavior when trying to avoid losses. Kahneman's research shows that, on average, people need to gain roughly twice as much as they are willing to lose for the trade-off to feel worthwhile. For instance, if you were offered a 50-50 bet where you could win or lose $100, most people would decline because the potential loss feels much worse than the potential gain feels good. However, if the potential gain were $200, people would be more likely to take the bet even though the odds are the same. This illustrates how much more sensitive we are to losses than to gains. Loss aversion also explains why people are often reluctant to sell investments at a loss, even when it would be a rational decision based on the future prospects of the investment. The pain of realizing the loss is so great that people prefer to hold onto losing assets in the hope that they will recover, even when the probability of recovery is low. Beyond individual behavior, loss aversion has significant implications for public policy and economics. Policymakers often face resistance to changes perceived as taking something away, even when those changes are objectively beneficial. This occurs because the potential loss, real or perceived, looms larger in people's minds than the potential benefits. Kahneman suggests that one way to counteract loss aversion is to reframe decisions in terms of gains rather than losses. For example, if a company wants to encourage employees to adopt a new workplace policy, framing the change as an opportunity to gain new skills or benefits is likely to be more effective than framing it as a way to avoid negative consequences. Similarly, in marketing, presenting a product as helping consumers save money rather than avoid wasting money can lead to higher sales, even though both phrases convey essentially the same message. In the financial world, loss aversion plays a significant role in shaping investment strategies. Many investors focus more on avoiding losses than on maximizing gains, leading them to adopt overly conservative strategies or hold on to underperforming stocks for too long. This behavior often leads to suboptimal financial decisions, as investors may miss opportunities for growth by prioritizing loss avoidance over long-term gains. Loss aversion is a fundamental part of human psychology, deeply influencing how we evaluate risks and make decisions. Kahneman's work in this area helps explain why people often act irrationally when faced with choices involving potential losses. It highlights the importance of understanding this bias to make better decisions in both personal and professional contexts. The insights from Thinking Fast and Slow have far-reaching implications for policymaking and economics, particularly in understanding how real people behave, as opposed to the rational agents assumed by classical economics. Traditional economic theory is based on the idea that individuals make rational decisions, aiming to maximize their utility or wealth. Kahneman's work, however, shows that human decision-making is far more complex, influenced by biases, heuristics, and cognitive shortcuts that often lead to irrational outcomes. One of Kahneman's most significant contributions to economics is the concept of behavioral economics, which blends insights from psychology and economics to understand how people actually behave in markets and other economic settings. This field acknowledges that individuals are not always rational decision makers, and that factors like loss, aversion, framing, and overconfidence can significantly affect economic choices. For example, in public policy, Kahneman's insight suggests that simply providing more information will not necessarily lead to better decisions. Cognitive biases can cause individuals to misinterpret or ignore data, or rely on emotional or heuristic judgments instead of facts. This has profound implications for areas such as healthcare, retirement savings, and consumer protection. Consider the issue of retirement savings. Many people do not save enough for retirement not because they lack information about its importance, but because of present bias, overvaluing immediate rewards, and loss aversion, the pain of sacrificing current consumption. Policymakers can use Kahneman's insights to design better interventions, such as automatic enrollment in pension plans or offering incentives framed in terms of gains rather than losses, to help nudge individuals toward more rational long-term planning. In financial markets, Kahneman's work highlights the dangers of overconfidence among investors and the impact of emotional decision-making. Boom and bust cycles in markets can, in part, be explained by cognitive biases. Investors tend to overreact to recent events due to the availability heuristic, and they often fall prey to the anchoring effect when considering market trends or stock valuations. Additionally, loss aversion can cause investors to hold on to poorly performing stocks longer than is rational, hoping to avoid realizing a loss. In terms of tax policy and regulation, Kahneman's research suggests that how policies are framed can greatly influence public acceptance and behavior. For instance, people are more likely to comply with a tax increase if it is framed as a contribution to improving public services, a gain, rather than as a loss of disposable income. Similarly, work opt-out systems for organ donation or pension savings, where individuals are automatically enrolled unless they actively choose to opt out, take advantage of people's tendency to stick with the status quo, leading to higher participation rates than opt-in systems. Moreover, Kahneman's work on prospect theory has important implications for understanding how individuals perceive risks and make decisions under uncertainty. This is particularly relevant in areas like insurance markets and disaster preparedness. People are often more willing to purchase insurance when they fear a loss, such as after a natural disaster, but may forego it when the risk feels remote, even if the objective probabilities of a loss remain the same. Recognizing these behavioral tendencies allows policymakers to craft better incentives and policies that account for the psychological factors influencing decision-making. Thinking, Fast and Slow, is a profound exploration of the human mind, revealing the complex interplay between our intuitive and analytical thinking systems, as well as the biases and heuristics that shape our decisions. Through decades of research, Daniel Kahneman has illuminated the ways we often act irrationally, even when we believe we are being logical or objective. This book is not only a landmark in psychology, but also a valuable guide for anyone looking to understand the complexities of human decision-making. Kahneman's insights challenge the way we think about our own thinking, offering practical tools for navigating the cognitive biases that shape our lives. Whether in personal decision-making, business strategy, or public policy, the lessons from this book can help individuals and organizations make better, more thoughtful decisions in an increasingly complex world. Thank you for watching. If you're interested in more books like this, subscribe and stay tuned. Let me know which book you'd like me to cover next.